Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I was thinking I actually went home last night. Yeah, I'm either the best father ever or a total sucker. So two of my boys had school this morning. So my wife and I decided that if we're going to come to the weekend, which we all obviously wanted to come, so we had to leave Saturday night because my boys had yeshiva Sunday morning. I don't want them to miss. And so my plan was, I had this all planned out. My plan was that I would, we stay a little bit Saturday night, maybe get something to eat, and then we'll go home and get home at a normal time. I've never, as a parent, I'd never understood the draw of a live game show. And my boys were just like, no, we are not leaving. And every 5 minutes, we're not leaving. And then it's like I turn around, it's midnight, my 9-year-old is standing there with a plate of pizza, French fries, and waffles. And I was like, okay, we gotta go. So I didn't get home till like 1 o'clock in the morning, and then I had to get up early to drive here this morning. So I assume everyone here went to sleep even later than I did.
Yeah.
So I'm not the only zombie walking around. It's really kind of crazy. So one of the wonderful things about coming to a weekend like this is that you have a certain amount of just inspiration that you get, and you just feel like really charged up. And it really hit me actually this morning, because this morning I went to shul to daven, and I walked into shul. This is my regular place, and I'm just like, I don't want to be here. I want to be back there. Like you're there. You're in sort of this cocoon, this bubble that is just, full of energy and so exciting. And there's something that has this level of, this is right. Something about it feels right. And the real challenge is two things. Number one is there's a real serious need for extreme therapy to now understand our new relationship with food. And by the way, the jokes about food don't stop, but people keep laughing because it's not funny. Because we're like, this is really me. I didn't need that, fifth rugula. But number two, really was more being on a serious note, is coming out of a weekend like this, and what do you do with it? Because you have something that was just really, it sort of touched you, and you feel like this is unbelievable, and you want to take it with you. And so the first thing you have to do, you have to figure out what the it is. Because we all sit here, and we heard a lot of the same speeches from the same people, and they were just, unbelievable. I mean, I have heard Charlie speak, I can't even tell you how many times. I mean, in fact, I have not heard him say something new that I have not heard in a long time. And it doesn't matter, because every time it gets me. And something different, something I hear that I didn't think about before that just really makes me think about it and like, wow. So you gotta figure out what the it is. Because really what we're all looking for at the end of the day, and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, is in terms of happiness, trying to find out what's gonna make us happy. But part of that is also figuring out like how we can make ourselves better people. Because we all know deep down that making yourself a better person is really the key to being happier. So the question is, if you want to figure out how to become better and how to grow, so how do you do that? There's got to be some sort of approach that we can take to figure out how to make yourself a better person. So I'll tell you something interesting. If you want, in a lot of fields of study, if you want to learn about something, a certain subject, the right way to truly understand it is to study the exact opposite. Or if you want to be a police officer, you don't study how people uphold the law and don't drive over the speed limit. Right? You learn you learn about what causes people to break the law. If you want to be a dentist, you don't study, how people brush their teeth twice a day and do all their mouthwash, what they're supposed to do, and have good dental hygiene. You look at what causes tooth decay. Even for those of you who are Seinfeld fans, even George Costanza understood this, right? Sometimes you just got to do the opposite. If you want to understand something, you got to do the opposite. So if we want to understand, if you take that logic and you apply it to our own lives and think, okay, how do I become great? Well, by logical extension, the thing we should be studying is, how can I be really bad? What can I do to be bad? Now, maybe some of you like me, the first time I ever heard this concept, I thought to myself, I don't need anyone to teach me how to be bad. It comes absolutely naturally. I don't need someone to teach me about the idea of sitting on the couch, binge watching Netflix while eating pizza and ice cream. Is that just me? Is anybody else? But it's something we need to understand about what it means to actually be bad. So there's this concept in Judaism, the Hebrew is niskatnu hadoros, that generations go down, meaning there was a revelation that we had at Mount Sinai, when Hashem gave us the Torah. And that was something that was like the beginning of us as a nation with the Torah. And subsequent generations, as we move further away from that revelation at Mount Sinai, we're not as close to it as we were. We're further removed, so we don't have the same level of sensitivity and of appreciation for it. In terms of our spiritual greatness, we're not what they were. There's an interesting story about Yaakov Kamenetsky, who's one of the great Torah sages from the last, say 30 years. He was sitting on a plane, it must have been a long flight, and he happened to be sitting next to somebody who was an atheist. And they were engaging each other in conversation, they were having discussions, and over the course of the flight, which again, it must have been a long flight, Rabbi Kamenetsky's son or grandson constantly they weren't sitting near each other, kept coming over to him and like, can I get you anything? Do you need anything? Is everything okay? You're comfortable? Something to drink? And after this happened a few times, this atheist turned to Rabbi Kamenetsky and said, I don't understand. I've got kids, I got grandkids, they aren't interested in talking to me, but your grandson or son is just constantly waiting on you hand and foot. What's the deal? So Rabbi Kamenetsky said, well, it's pretty straightforward. We believe that human beings were created by God, and we had a revelation at Mount Sinai. And as you get further away in the generations, you're further away from that revelation. And as a result, they look at me as being closer to that great revelation, so they afford me a lot of respect. You think we descended from apes. Your kids think you're a generation closer to apes. Why would they give you any respect? So this idea of spiritual greatness has sort of declined over time. The same thing applies when it comes to what it means to really be wicked. It's a really good word I could come up with. Why? Because we think of wicked. We see wicked things all the time. Obviously, we saw horrific things happen yesterday in Pittsburgh, and obviously our hearts go out to our brothers and sisters in Pittsburgh. But even that type of wickedness is something about it that's a little bit different than what it used to be. Because the same way that you had someone who could understand and appreciate God because he was closer, you had somebody who understood and appreciated what God was all about, that God runs the world, and said, I don't care. I'm going to fight against you, God, anyways. Which is amazing. To us, it's like, what? Like, it seems crazy, but that's how people acted. True wickedness came from not just, I'm not interested. It came from, I know exactly what's going on, and I'm going to fight against it anyways. So if you look at an example of extreme wickedness, you can use that as a guidepost to learn from that and understand what it means to achieve true greatness. So the first place to start really is the first crime in the Torah. Now, by the first crime in the Torah, I'm not talking about what happened with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, because that's really not what I think of as a crime. It's more of call it lack of self-control and inability to control what they want, what they want from what Hashem told them to be doing. Actual first crime in the Torah I'm referring to is really Cain. Killed his brother. Remember the story? They both brought sacrifices. God seemed to show Abel some favor. Cain decided enough, and he's going to kill him. Now, for those of you who are blessed with siblings, we all know what it's like to fight with siblings. I can just speak for myself. I have an older brother who's a year and a half older than I am, and we had some pretty epic battles growing up. And if I had a dime for every time one of us said, I'm going to kill you, I would have retired a long time ago. But we never actually did it. I mean, I may have tried once, whatever. But no. You say but Cain actually killed him. And again, keep in mind who Cain was. He was essentially the third human being that was ever created. He understood exactly who God was. He had a level of prophecy that we can't even fathom. And he still said, no, I don't care. I know God's not going to be happy with this, but I'm going to do it anyways. But what causes somebody to act that way, knowing without any doubts, no rationalizations, that I'm just going to do it anyways? So rabbis give us a very interesting explanation. Look at what happened. Cain brings an offering. God seems to be lukewarm about it. Abel brings one, and God's all over it and is very excited by it. Cain looked at himself and looked at Abel and said, we're the only two sons of Adam. At this point, you may have assumed that Adam wasn't going to have any other more kids. The descendants of the world are going to come from the two of us. And as between the two of us, God favors him. Where does that leave me and my descendants? We're going to be nowhere. He was afraid. He was afraid for himself and his descendants that they were going to have no place in the world. So what does he do? Premeditated murder. The rabbis go through the explanation of exactly what was happening, and it wasn't just he kind of lost control one time, and he actually lured Abel into murder. She wasn't sure how to commit murder at that point. It was never been done before. Had to figure out how to do it. But the fear drove him to act in a way that was rational or not, but it was inappropriate for sure, at the very least. And this idea that fear can cause us to do things that we wouldn't otherwise do, it almost doesn't even need any explanation. It's one story. I had a neighbor. When I first moved into my house about 20 years ago, older couple, and I had the opportunity. I got to know them a little bit. Their kids were much older and moved out of the house a long time ago, and I used to walk him home from shul Friday nights. And he's one of these guys. He's old enough to be my grandfather. Super tough. Just a super tough guy. And one time, this happened about 5-6 years ago. He and his wife were crossing the street and they got hit by a car. And I got the news. I rushed home from work. It was a terrible, terrible day. One of my other neighbors was the EMT that took them to the hospital. And he was telling me the story that this man, after he got hit by the car, he was actually okay, relatively speaking. Tough guy. But something happened when he got to the hospital. He just, I don't know a better way to put it other than to say he started to freak out. And he had a heart attack. He otherwise would have survived. But the fear took over. It caused an involuntary reaction in him because he was afraid. And this is the kind of thing that, when you look at it again from the lens of how it causes us to act and behave, it's pretty overwhelming. Now, I don't want you to think that it's just, so maybe Cain was a bit of an outlier, even though I think we all know that's not the truth. But let's sort of move a little further in the Torah. One of the greatest villains in the Torah was Jacob's twin brother Esav. And how did Esav treat Jacob? Well, first he wanted to kill him. And then later, even after years later, when they reconciled, Esav essentially had to move away. And the Torah says that he left where he was, mipnei Yaakov achiv, because of Yaakov, his brother. And again, the rabbis explained, Esav was just like, I can't be around this guy. He's too much for me. What was it? What was the issue? That Esav had everything. What was he worried about? The rabbis explained, because Esav constantly measured himself against Yaakov. How do I stack up against him? And he always found himself lacking. And he basically had a choice. He could try to work on his own self-esteem, make himself a better person, or he could kill Yaakov. And given the choice, he said, okay, I'm going to kill him. Is that rational? Does that make any sense? Is killing him going to make you any happier? No. And even again, when they made up years later, Esav moved away, and there's peace between them, right? You think at that point, okay, now maybe things are fine. Like, there's somebody you find yourself competing against a little bit when you're growing up, and you get to a point and you're both relatively successful. At some point you say, okay, enough, I don't care what this guy thinks anymore. But Esav couldn't get over that. And there was a certain fear that he had that I'm just not good enough. And that forced him to, again, first try to kill Yaakov and then ultimately to move away. And again, when you start looking through the Torah through this lens, you start to see that it really just repeats itself over and over again. So let's fast forward a little bit. In Egypt, Jews are in Egypt, and the story is pretty straightforward. Pharaoh decides he's worried about the Jews. What's he specifically worried about? Well, again, if you just read the words in the Torah, he was worried that there would be an attack, and not that the Jews would necessarily take over, but that they'd leave. And as a result, he decided to enslave them. Now think about this for a second. Not that much earlier, Egypt was there was a worldwide famine. And one guy saved Egypt from not just financial ruin, but turned it into the richest country in the world. It was Joseph. If it weren't for him, Egypt was toast, just like the rest of the world. Joseph was dead, he was no longer around, but his kids were around, and they were serving in the government. They were acting as loyal citizens. In fact, not only did they not want to leave, but they were actually trying to assimilate into Egyptian society as much as they could. And yet, Paro had this fear. I'm afraid. I'm afraid they're going to leave. I'm afraid they're going to take over. I don't know what is it. I don't know what he's afraid of. He's afraid of something. And as a result, he takes what could have been actually, from his own perspective, like put aside spirituality and God's plan for the world. Just think about from Paro's perspective, he had what was the greatest asset in the world at his disposal, right? Jewish bankers, lawyers, and doctors, right? And what does he do? He enslaves them. I mean, what a waste. Why? Because he was afraid. And what actually we start seeing here is, and this is a little bit of a side point and deserves a complete separate talk, I guess, is this is where you start to see the beginning of organized anti-Semitism, where Jews are treated differently because of the fact that they're Jews. And the fear that people feel relating towards us as Jews causes them to act in a way that again, just doesn't really make any sense. And at a spiritual level, there's a source for this, which is the idea that Torah tells us, the rabbis tell us that Hashem went around to the nations of the world, whatever exactly this means, and offered them the Torah and said, "Are you interested?" And every other nation turned it down. Said, "No, thanks. We're not doing that." And the Jews said, "No, we want that. There's an awesome responsibility and an opportunity that comes with taking the Torah. We want it." What happens? All the other nations of the world realize what we have. Again, this is on a spiritual level. It's much deeper than just a question of understanding how individuals are behaving nowadays. But they saw what we have, and it's like the ultimate FOMO. They have the Torah, we don't. Oh, we could, not okay. In fact, when I was on the JWRP men's trip, I guess that was a week and a half ago, so we go to Yad Vashem, the Israeli Holocaust Memorial, and we're on the tour, and the tour guide, a guy named David Sussman, I don't know if any of you ever had him, he's absolutely fantastic. He's explaining what was specifically Hitler's problem with the Jewish people. And I never really heard it described this way before. But he said because Hitler's perspective on the world and life was, might makes right. It's all about the physical. If you can do it, you can do it. And don't let anybody stop you. And he looked at the Jewish people and said, well, 1 second, morality? What's morality? I don't need morality. If I can do it, I can do it. No one can stop me. I'm just going to do it. He looked at the Jewish people and said, they're the source of morality in the world. I can't have that. I can't have them around. They need to go. And that was what started his whole march towards destruction of Jewry. But again, that's really a bit of a side point, but it's an important thing to recognize, especially if you see things are happening in the world, and it's like hard to make sense of sometimes. Like, just leave us alone. There's an underlying spiritual cause to that you have to appreciate. You're not going to make it go away. And assimilation, in some respects, sometimes makes it worse. We think, I'll be like them, and they'll leave me alone. And it actually, again, it defies logic. But this is just how these things end up working. But anyway, so you go back to fear for a second. So now we have an understanding, an idea that fear drives us to do things that just often don't make any sense. And a lot of what happens is, and when you see this, we just talked about in terms of what happened with how Paro was treating the Jewish people, but fear causes a lack of trust. And you're afraid of something's going to happen, and then you behave in a way to try to prevent it when the reality is that's not what's happening at all. It was all in your head. But the fear causes us to act in a way that doesn't make any sense, and it causes us to do crazy things. Now, one of the things about this that's an amazing idea is it absolutely is the key to understanding how to resolve any interpersonal conflicts. Because now that you know that the real secret to being wicked is fear, so when someone's acting in a way that makes a real problem for you and is causing you difficulties, what do? You say, hey, 1 second, this person's afraid of something. What is it? I don't know, but you got to figure that out. And once you know that there's an underlying cause to what's making them behave the way that they are, you can take a totally different approach. It's really no different than when your 5 or 6 year old is throwing a temper tantrum about something that is just irrelevant. As parents, we know it has nothing to do with what he's throwing a temper tantrum about. It's the fact that he or she is tired, right? And when you know that, it's like, okay, I'm not going to get upset. I can deal with this because I know what's causing this. So when you're dealing with another individual human being, it's the same thing. There's something that's causing them to behave the way that they are. And when you understand that there's a different cause there, at least from a perspective of not getting upset, not trying to overcome and sort of force your way into a resolution, like, okay, I got to deal with this person's issues. Which, of course, by the way, is something that's another unbelievable idea. It's the same thing for ourselves. Right? How many times do we act in a way that's irrational, and we look back on how we behaved, and we're like, what was I thinking? Because there was a fear factor. There was something that was there that was making us worried about whatever it is. But trying to understand what your own root causes of what's causing you to behave the way that you are in your life gives you an ability to say, wait, take a step back. Hey, okay, let's take a deep breath. Let me think about what's happening really here. What's causing me to behave the way that I'm behaving? You know, and in a lot of ways, and the examples of this, by the way, you know, you can, I'm sure I don't even have to give any because people know, you know, our own lives. This is something that's universal for people. But like one example that this one I always think of is like, because it shows you how it can work on a grand scale. Think about what caused World War I. Well, that's the technical cause. But Kaiser Wilhelm was basically afraid that the English and the French were conspiring against him. And he decided he needed to do a little saber rattling. And he did that, and the English and the French looked at each other and said, we better take care of this guy. He's going to cause some problems. The thing that he was afraid of, his fear caused him to actually bring into being. And we think about our own, personal relationships. How many times does something that we're afraid of cause us to act in a way towards someone that is actually going to cause the problem that we have? And it's one thing I've learned, and this is more of a guy issue, I think, than it is for the women in the room. It was like to actually make yourself vulnerable to somebody else. How difficult that is. How many husbands and wives are afraid of actually being honest with each other and vulnerable because I'm afraid of what my wife is going to think, so I don't want to share with her. And what happens when I don't share? Well, we're closed off and we can't communicate, and that causes more problems. Because the fear that we have in our head is what causes us to actually have the difficulty in the first place. If it weren't for that fear, then we would actually be able to get over it and move forward and do the things that we need to do. Think about it, when we're angry with somebody does something that upsets us. How many times are we upset because we see what they did as really a threat to our own self-image? And why? Because we're afraid. We're afraid of something, of what people are going to think, of how things are going to turn out. And as a result, we get angry with someone when it's not about them, it's about us. And you could try to control all people in the world as much as you want. It's not going to help. You have to learn how to conquer your own fear, because at the end of the day, if the secret to being wicked is being afraid, the secret to being great is overcoming your fear. That's what you have to do. Because if we want to change, we're sitting here at this amazing weekend, and it's just fantastic, and we're all going to go home, and I learned such amazing things over Shabbos. Whatever it is, for everyone, it's different. And I learned something amazing, and I'm going to do this. And then we get home, and it's, well, maybe not. Why not? Because we're afraid. When I say we, I mean me. I think about the things that in my own life that I want to change, and there's something there's a mental block that's there that I can't get over. And I'll just give you one example. So everyone knows, this is, again, universal. Gossip, lashon hara, it's bad. Really bad. But how many times am I standing around with my friends and somebody makes a joke at someone else's expense, and I'm thinking to myself, what I want to say is, guys, come on, let's not. But what my brain is telling me is, oh, really? You know what they're going to say to you? Oh, look at this guy. You think he's Mr. Holier than thou. You think you're such a great guy. And so I keep my mouth shut. And worse, maybe I even join in because I want to be accepted. Because I'm afraid. I'm afraid of how people are going to react to me if I want to show them that I'm interested in becoming a better person and achieving actual growth. And what's crazy is, this is the craziest part, and I know it's just because with my friends, all of them are thinking the same thing. Every single guy is sitting there saying, God, we shouldn't be doing this. Why are we doing this? But nobody's willing to take that first step and just break through the fear and get everyone else to be like, so, yeah, you're right. Good one. Right? Not only is my fear holding me back, but actually, any one of us, we could be the hero, but we're just not willing to do it. How sad is that? So I think, and what I like to try to do sometimes when I have the opportunity to speak in front of an audience is to really be as practical as we can. I mentioned this yesterday. In my legal practice, I found that you could be the most brilliant legal scholar in the world. If you can't come up with a practical solution, nobody cares. You could be Clarence Darrow, and it's like, yay, figure out a way to get this done. Otherwise, I'm not interested.
What kind of lawyer are you?
Corporate bankruptcy. So figuring out what type of fear that we have is definitely step one. And there's a lot of different ways that these types of fear can manifest themselves. But if we're going to talk about fear for a second, it's very, very important to understand what fear is and what it's not. Fear really exists in our minds, right? Now, fear is not necessarily a bad thing. Fear is something that actually, it's almost like think of it as a human safety device. Because if we didn't have fear, we'd probably do some things that are pretty stupid. And sometimes you need that fear to actually keep yourself in check. We all know somebody who just has no... I had this one associate who used to work for me, brilliant guy. He was really fantastic. He literally just did not care what anyone else thought. He no fear. I don't care. Which was great, except that he had a tendency to do things that were really, really stupid. And I'm like, it would be great if you were a little nervous sometimes. That would make things really... You need that a little bit. And actually, when I was driving here this morning, I saw a billboard for a movie that's coming out, I think, next week, Bohemian Rhapsody, the rock band Queen. And the tagline on the billboard was, "Fearless lives forever." Yeah, except Freddie Mercury died when he was pretty young. It was fearless. Good. What good of that to him? So fear is not necessarily a bad thing, but understanding what the point or what the crux of the fear is critical. And there's a couple different ideas in terms of the way fear may manifest itself that is very important to recognize the difference if you want to start thinking about how to conquer it. So for example, you could have, we talked about this a little before already, you have a fear of rejection. And you're afraid that if I'm vulnerable to somebody, they're going to reject me. And nobody likes being rejected. And early on in a relationship, everyone's on their best behavior. When you're dating, it's always very exciting at the beginning. And because you're getting to know somebody, it's fresh, it's new, but there's a certain level of, I'm not going to say certain things. That first time you tell somebody I love you, and you're just like, and if they don't say I love you back, and you're just like, oh. We laugh about it now, but if somebody that happens to, it can be really just crushing. Because you put yourself out there, and that fear of rejection means that the next time, you know what, I'm not doing that again. I'm not going through that again. And so fear of rejection, it's very, very real. And a similar idea, fear of standing out. I just go along to get along. I don't want to be different. I just want to be part of the crowd. And how about we see this? These are the kind of things that you can talk about them and you think, oh God, give me a break. It's another after school special movie. The kid who's afraid he's going to stick out, so he just goes along, and next thing you know, he's breaking into Farmer Brown's barn, and he's breaking a window, and he's just, oh God, the good kid, and his father's got to sit him down. It's very important to do the right thing. I just wanted to fit in, Dad. But we as adults, we do the same thing. How often do we find ourselves in a situation where we're thinking, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to stand out. I don't want to be different. I just want to be part of the gang. Now, there's another type of fear that's, and these things have a tendency to be somewhat similar, but again, manifests itself differently, which is fear of failure. I went to law school because I'm risk averse. I hate risk. I have clients, I don't want to get too deep into some of this stuff because it's very boring, but I have clients who basically they're hedge funds. They invest in in distressed companies. And some of these guys make a lot of money, and they're not that bright. But they risk. They have a tolerance for risk, and they just know what's a good risk, what's not. I'm terrible at that stuff. It's like I'm like the total sucker who's like, oh, this thing's on sale, we got to go now. I'm just like, the thing's been on sale forever. They're not running out. Don't worry. It's a certain fear of failing that to me it's very tough. But if you're afraid of failing, risk is not a bad thing. Failing is not a bad thing. Failing is actually critical. Again, this is a total separate talk for how you deal with fear of failing and the fact that failure is what makes us grow. But if you have that fear of failure, it's just I'm just not doing that. I took my now 14-year-old son to Israel. I guess it was about 2 years ago for a pre-bar mitzvah trip, just the two of us. And so one day we went into Gush Etzion, and we did this great weapons training, which is really cool. And afterwards they have I think it's the world's second longest zip line. Yeah, wow, it doesn't describe it. So anyway, so you can go one at a time. I think you can do two at a time. We decided we're gonna go one at a time. So my son gets up there and he goes. I'm like, okay, zip line. I mean, it's not that big a deal. And like I walk up the steps and I'm standing on this like platform and I can barely even see the other side. But I can see is this massive ravine. You can barely see the bottom of it. I'm like, okay, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. And this Israeli guy is like, oh, no, what's the problem? Like, oh, I'm not doing this. But I see my son, who's like halfway across. And by the way, it's like, I'm not joking, it's a 20-minute drive back to where you started.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, I'm like, I don't have a choice. If I don't go, he'll kill me. Literally, he'll kill me. So I was terrified, but like fear of failure, fear of something bad happening. I got to do it. It was the same way. Growing up, I'm a very type A personality, as you may have noticed, and I couldn't handle roller coasters. Could not do them. I mean, I was like the biggest wimp, and I was one of the biggest wimps amongst my friends. All my friends doing roller coasters, and I'm just sitting on the side. I cannot do them because I can't handle not being in control. Until that first time, I was 30. I went on a roller coaster. Yeah, I can't believe I'm admitting that publicly. And the first time you do it, I was like, what have I been missing my whole life? This is like so crazy. But there's a certain fear. I'm not doing it. If I'm not in control, I'm not driving. I am not doing it. And now I've gotten over that, right? By the way, so nowadays when one of my daughters, she'll go on anything, and if it has the word death in the title, she is in. And I'm going on these roller coasters, like going up, like slowly going up, and I'm like, what am I doing this for? I've kind of proven I can do this. I'm not interested anymore. But things we do for our kids. But this fear of failure, fear of things going wrong, it's just a strong driver and holding us back from changing what we want to be. And that actually brings us to the type of fear that I find is actually the most difficult to deal with, which is fear of change. We like comfort. We like what we know. And why is that? Why? I mean, some people aren't like that. Some people love changing things up all the time. Why do we have such a fear of change? Well, there's the fear of the unknown, but I think there's another part to it. And this is especially true when it comes to our own lives. If I change the way I'm doing something, then I'm acknowledging I've been doing it wrong until now. Ooh, I'm not going to admit that. I'm going to, through my behavior, show everyone that I've been doing it wrong for the last 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, what a blow to your ego. It's just so overwhelming. Just, forget it, I'm not doing it. It's not necessarily even the comfort of it. It's, I can't acknowledge that I've been doing something wrong. And we find in our own lives so often that that's what holds us back. I can't do it. I can't admit it. I'm afraid. When you acknowledge that for the first time and you start to realize it, okay, now you're starting to get somewhere. So let's just talk for a minute, again, being as practical as we can about how to overcome our fear. And we said this a minute ago, that fear is all in our minds. Sometimes it's a good thing, but it only exists in our mind. Again, I think about my 9-year-old son. He happens to be a tremendous athlete. And I watch him play baseball, hockey, whatever it is, and he is afraid of nothing. He plays shortstop. I remember this happened, this is the nachas that we get, watch our kids playing sports. So this goes, I think it was 2 years ago, so he was 7, playing shortstop, and some kid just smashes one up the middle of the field. He goes flat out, he is completely vertical to make this crazy catch. Hits the ground hard. I'm like, oh my God, that was amazing. No problem, gets back up, dusts stuff off. I mean, he told me afterwards, it hurt, because he came down hard. Next, he's doing it again. My wife, he started playing hockey. My wife took a video of him. He's like just diving, like throwing his body in there. No problem, doesn't worry, it's no problem. He saw a spider the size of a millimeter in his bathroom, and he would not go in there for a month because he was terrified. Actual pain? No problem. A spider that you could just literally, nothing? Terrified. Because it's here, whatever it is. It's something that's an issue for him. But when we start to recognize that these issues are all in our mind, okay, so now we can start to get somewhere and actually accomplish something. So I want to share with you an exercise that I learned from a psychologist on the West Coast. Her name is Dr. Marilyn Wedge. She's actually at Stanford, I believe. And she came up with this idea. Well, if fear is all in our heads, well, we can actually control that a little bit. So let me say where I learned about this, just so you appreciate how it works. Like many people, I fly all the time. Turbulence never bothered me at all. Big deal. About 6 years ago, my wife and I were flying back from Florida, and it was where it starts getting a little bumpy, and I'm like kind of falling asleep, and suddenly I just feel like a bump. Like, oh my gosh, we must have landed already. Fantastic. And then I hear the pilot say, everyone in their seats immediately. The plane starts doing this, the things start popping open, people are screaming. I am just thinking, oh my, it's the end. I was terrified. What felt like 2 hours later was probably, 10 seconds. The pilot comes on, I apologize, this kind of thing, sometimes we can't always predict what the turbulence is going to be, and so I'm sorry. From that point forward, I was an absolute nervous wreck flying. I mean, I managed to get myself on the plane, but I couldn't sit still. I mean, I had a flight to Denver a few years ago, and it was, I think the flight left at noon. Yeah, I'm sitting there asking, the flight attendant, 2 bourbons, please. Because that's just, otherwise I just can't make it through. The exact bourbon. And it was becoming somewhat paralyzing for me because I got to fly. I mean, I got places to go. I've got work, family, vacations. It's like I can't stop flying. So I was doing some research, and anyone who has a fear of flying, you do the research on the odds of anything dangerous or really bad or crash happening when you're flying is significantly less than getting into a fatal car accident. I mean, it's not even close. But I never have any concern about getting in the car and driving somewhere. So Dr. Wedge says okay, look, if fear is all in our heads, well, we can control our thought process somewhat with a little bit of training. So here's what you do. And this exercise, the first time I read about it, I thought it was a little bit crazy. It made no sense to me. But once you start doing it, you see it actually starts to work. So you go into a room, and you set a timer for 15 minutes. And maybe before you do that, you need a little bit of time thinking, okay, I'm interested in doing X. I had something at this weekend that was really unbelievable. It really inspired me. I want to change something, whatever it is. But it's not happening for me. Maybe wait a day or so. And spend the time thinking, what is the problem? And try to drill down a little bit for yourself. And this is not easy. This takes work. But think about it. What is it specifically that's causing me, that's holding me back, that I'm afraid of? Go into a room, set a timer on your phone for, she suggests 15 minutes. I found that to be a little bit hard to do, so I was closer to doing 5 to 10. No distractions, and just sit there and think about the worst possible things you can think of. When it came to flying, I think about, there's going to be turbulence, I'm going to crash, I'm going to do all the horrible things you can think of. Do nothing but think of that for 5, 10 minutes. Which sounds crazy. You think, well, why am I torturing myself? What are you, crazy? Why do I want to do that for? When the timer goes off, you know what's going to happen? You're going to put your phone away, you're going to get up, you're going to walk out of that room and go back to life. And if you do this enough times, you start training yourself to realize that the fear that I'm feeling, I can turn it on and off. I can go in a room and start it, and I can leave that room and stop it. And so when the thing that's holding you back, when the actual fear, you're at that moment where you want to do something, and the fear's stopping you, say, hey, fear, 1 second. I'm turning you off. The timer's off. We're done. And as simplistic as that sounds, it works. I found myself, I can fly again. But it's this idea of recognizing that the things that are in our head that holds us back are things that we can control. And once we learn that we can control them, we can take all the inspiration that we've had here and take it with us and actually use it in our lives. And I was to end with a blessing for all of us. We had this opportunity. It was an amazing Shabbos together. No more jokes about food. We had this amazing Shabbos together. We're in this bubble, in this cocoon. It was amazing. And we're going back to real life. And we can take something with us. We can do it. That can actually make our lives better, make us happier people. We just got to realize that the secret to being great is overcoming the fear that's holding us back. Have a wonderful rest of your day.